Hello, dear class. Join me, if you will, if you feel like it, for another short excursion into Tristram Shandy, as read with the appropriate accent by a person equipped with that accent by birth. And that's your professor. So, chapter 34, I pick out at random from book 3, begins, "It is a singular blessing that nature has formed the mind of man with the same happy backwardness and renitency against conviction which is observed in old dogs of not learning new tricks. What a shuttlecock of a fellow," that would be the ball in a game of badminton, "what a shuttlecock of a fellow would the greatest philosopher that ever existed be whisked into at once, did he read such books and observe such facts and think such thoughts as would be eternally making him change sides." Now, my father, as I told you last year, really, seemingly, we've been in conversation with Tristram for a long time, detested all this. He picked up an opinion, sir, as a man in a state of nature picks up an apple. It becomes his own, and if he is a man of spirit, he would lose his life rather than give it up. I am aware that Didius, the great civilian, which means not the great ordinary person out of uniform, but the great civil lawyer, the lawyer of civil cases, will contest this point, and cry out against me, "Whence comes this man's right to this apple? Ex confesso," he will say, "things were in a state of nature, the apple as much Frank's apple as John's. Pray, Mr. Shandy, what patent has he to show for it? And how did it begin to be his? Was it when he set his heart upon it, or when he gathered it, or when he chewed it, or when he roasted it, or when he peeled it, or when he brought it home, or when he digested, or when he—" Let's not complete that sentence, Sterne likes to say with an enormous quintuple dash, possibly sextuple, hard to tell, followed by a question mark, followed by another triple M dash. Dashes are not much in fashion these days, but they're wonderful, and it's a shame, those of you who write fiction, that if you don't use them in their full variety. The pictorial or graphic aspect of punctuation is not only delicious, fun, and beautiful to look at, it also explicates more closely how we are to hear the rhythm of the sentence and the meaning of the sentence than simply using a comma and what you call a period, we call a full stop. Rarely a semicolon, even more rarely a colon, that wonderful thing which ushers in, opens the door on what comes next, and can be alternated very usefully with semicolons, as you will see in the early 17th century in the King James Bible, long paragraphs in which colons and semicolons alternate most fruitfully. So, by all means, experiment with these lengthened dashes. The N dash, you'll remember, is the hyphen. It's the length of the letter N. The M, twice as long, is a dash. And then you can have a double M dash and a triple M dash, and longer, as here. Certainly, Sterne loved these lengthened dashes, and many authors of the 18th and the 19th centuries did too. It's gone out of fashion by the 20th. I've used them because I was familiar with them from being required to read 18th century texts when I was a schoolboy, and I've had great fun. There are moments in the middle of a paragraph when a thought arrives, an important interjection arrives in the mind of the narrator or for other reasons, and after a lengthy triple M dash perhaps, you can open a parenthesis right at the very end of the third M dash, all connected up into one long dash, and then interject your interjection and complete that with a closing parenthesis followed instantly by the long tail of the completing triple M dash. It looks beautiful, and it makes the point that you've travelled almost to another planet to put in the thought that is contained in this utterly extraneous material. It's exciting, it's beautiful, it makes a point. So, back to Sterne. For 'tis plain, sir, if the first picking up of the apple made it not his, that no subsequent act could. Brother Didius, Tribonius will answer. Now, Tribonius the civilian and church lawyer's beard being 3 inches and a half and 1/8, and 3 inches and a half and 3/8 longer than Didius his beard, meaning Didius's beard, when he's into his stride in pedantic parody, Sterne likes to extend something like Didius his beard or John's apple to become Didius his beard and John his apple, which is indeed how that apostrophe S becomes the possessive in English. John's apple is merely a contraction of John his apple. And so, Tribonius, I'm glad he takes up the cudgels for me, for I will give myself no further trouble about the answer. Brother Didius, Tribonius will say, it is a decreed case. You may find it in the fragments of Gregorius and Hermogenes' codes, all these various codes, and all the codes, from Justinian's down to the codes of Louis and des Eaux. It's been the practice of commentators to cudgel Sterne for thinking that des Eaux was a name, which indeed it could be, rather than of the waters, and the code des Eaux of the waterways, which has existed since Roman times. These commentators all seem to briefly forget that Sterne's French was very good. He had no need to make this mistake, and I don't think it's a mistake. He's referring to the Waterways Code, and I had a good friend of mine, an American expatriate in France, who was proud to be the officer in charge of the local waterways. These local waterways, of which to be the officer went right back to Roman times. He was thrilled with this, as well he might be. So he continues that you may find it in these famous codes, that the sweat of a man's brows and the exudations of a man's brains, the sweat of a man's brains, are as much a man's own property as the breeches upon his backside, which said exudations, etc., being dropped upon the said apple by the labour of finding it and picking it up, and being moreover indissolubly wasted and indissolubly annexed by the picker-up to the thing picked, carried home, roasted, peeled, eaten, digested, and so on, that thing of which Sterne decorously put in a dash earlier, which he's now replacing with an and so on, implying the defecation. He's quite happy to use the word shit where it isn't, where there's no humour to be got out of using something like and so on, or ... or dash. 'Tis evident that the gatherer of the apple, in so doing, has mixed up something which was his own with the apple which was not his own, by which means he has acquired a property, or, in other words, the apple is John's apple. By the same learned chain of reasoning, my father stood up for all his opinions. He had spared no pains in picking them up, and the more they lay out of the common way, the better still was his title. No mortal claimed them. They had cost him, moreover, as much labour in cooking and digesting as in the case above, so that they might well and truly be said to be his own goods and chattels. Accordingly, he held fast by 'em, both by teeth and claws, and would fly to whatever he could lay his hands on, and in a word would entrench and fortify them round with as many circumvallations and breastworks as my Uncle Toby would a citadel. The word Toby, according to my beloved Partridge, Eric Partridge, the name of a distinguished scholar of the origins of language. I have an enormous volume of his definitive work in my abandoned office on the campus. According to Partridge, Toby is a slang word for buttocks in English. Buttocks or bum or backside or ass. There was one plaguey rub in the way of this, the scarcity of materials to make anything of a defence with, in the case of a smart attack, inasmuch as few men of great genius had exercised their parts in writing books upon the subject of great noses. By the trotting of my lean horse, the thing is incredible. A homemade oath, I think, of Sterne's. And I am quite lost in my understanding when I am considering what a treasure of precious time and talents together has been wasted upon worse subjects, and how many millions of books in all languages and in all possible types and bindings have been fabricated upon points not half so much tending to the unity and peacemaking of the world. What was to be had, however, he set the greater store by, and though my father would oft-times sport with my Uncle Toby's library, which by the by was ridiculous enough, yet at the very same time he did it, he collected every book and treatise which had been systematically wrote upon noses, with as much care as my honest Uncle Toby had done those up on military architecture. 'Tis true, a much smaller table would have held them, but that was not thy transgression, my dear uncle. Here, but why here, rather than in any other part of my story, I'm not able to tell, but here it is. My heart stops to pay to thee, my dear Uncle Toby, once for all, the tribute I owe thy goodness. Here let me thrust my chair aside, and kneel down upon the ground, whilst I am pouring forth the warmest sentiments of love for thee, and veneration for the excellency of thy character that ever virtue and nature kindled in a nephew's bosom. Peace and comfort rest for evermore upon thy head. Thou enviest no man's comforts, insultedst no man's opinions, thou blackenedst no man's character, devourest no man's bread, gently with faithful Trim behind me didst thou amble round the little circle of thy pleasures, jostling no creature in thy way. For each one's service thou hadst a tear, for each man's need thou hadst a shilling. Whilst I am worth one to pay a weeder, thy path from thy door to thy bowling green shall never be overgrown. Whilst there is a rood and a half of land, a standard old English measurement, in the Shandy family, thy fortifications, my dear Uncle Toby, shall never be demolished. This is a passage typical of something that people accused Sterne of and have continued to accuse him of in the subsequent centuries, I think completely ludicrously as well as unfairly. That's of sentimentality. But anybody who cannot see the humour in the unbridled sentimental affection in this passage seems to me wanting somewhat in sense of humour, and so hostile to any declaration of affection that they instantly rise up as if their whole capacity to be amused have been destroyed by this declaration of fondness from nephew to uncle. I see no reason to find it obnoxious, and I find it sweet and funny at the same time. As I hope you do, my dear students, and hope you go on into the what's it called, the